nicer.
And also, I wasn't going to mention that we actually saw a physical fight in. Our mate was punched. Yeah.
Oh my god!
It was really peaceful. Only one of our mates got punched in the face.
Did you get punched?
Our mate did.
Okay.
Hello and welcome to another episode of Political Dregs. I'm going to try and give some introductions again this time because it's been a while. I'm Calvin Robinson. I am a former Conservative candidate twice over, former Brexit Party candidate once. We've got Hamish Hunter, former Conservative candidate for council in Hampstead. We've got Amir Sajidi, former Change UK, Conservative, Lib Dem. Did I miss any out, Amir? We've got Joel Davidson, former elected Conservative councillor and former London list candidates. And we have Irina von Weise. I hope I said it right. Is it von Weise or von Weise?
Perfect. It's von Weise, but it was almost there. So
no, please do correct me. I'm a school teacher, as I say to my kids when I take the register, please correct me if I say your name wrong. And you are the former London representative in the European Parliament. That's
correct.
For the
Absolutely.
Liberal Democrats.
For Liberal Democrats, that's right.
But it's a great sign when we've got everyone from the political spectrum, except for the anti-Semites, on here. You know, from the Tories to the Lib Dems to the Brexit Party, and we can all have a good political discourse. That's an amazing thing for British politics, I think. So let's all talk about something we can share in common. Let's talk about the state of terrorism in the United Kingdom at the moment, and these convicted terrorists who are being released early from prison. I know Joel's particularly passionate about this, so I'll let you start off with your ranting.
It's absolutely appalling, Calvin. We have a huge Tory majority, and we have a solid consensus behind the need to clamp down on law and order in this country and clamp down on crime. And frankly, it's just unacceptable. We need an emergency national security suspension of the European Convention of Human Rights to allow terrorists to be detained indefinitely if they remain a public risk.
Joel's right wing again. This is great. Keep going.
No, I am horrified at what we've seen. It's happening again and again. We've got a Conservative government. We have the most right wing Home Secretary since Michael Howard, easily, who was a legend, by the way. So what's going on? So let's see some tough measures. And we've got rampant crime out of control, both in terms of terrorism. And in terms of other crimes. So, yeah, I'm appalled, and we've got to absolutely clamp down on it.
So I agree with you, but as this podcast comes out, today, I believe, new legislation is being announced, so we don't actually know what it is yet while we're recording. But is rushed legislation ever effective? Is that ever a good way of fixing problems like this? Hamish?
Well, it's absolutely not. The Blair government famously created at least one criminal offence for every day that it was in power. And I think if you ask people in the criminal law community, law enforcement, it didn't really add very much. You've got a criminal justice bill, almost every year or so. What we need, and I agree with Joel in this respect, that we cannot have people who are released who are clearly a present danger to people. What we need is to have, I believe, a bit more flexibility in sentencing and parole for the judges and the parole boards who look at individual cases. I do not believe that every single person who is convicted of a terror-related offence in terms of, having been radicalised, could possibly be put behind bars for the rest of their life. These people, some of them can be rehabilitated and can be safe in the
some
community.
can be deported as well. That's not,
Yeah.
Well, indeed, but equally, it's clearly an unacceptable situation where we're having people who are known to the authorities who are being released and causing issues. What I would say is that what we don't need to do is overreact. So, yes, there have been issues.
A guy running down the street with a knife, randomly knifing people. I think we should overreact to that, frankly.
Well, I think we should react appropriately to that,
Yeah.
which is, but
stop it from happening.
Of course, but the problem, fundamentally, if you locked up every man between the ages of 12 and 60 in prison, there would be no crime, right? That's
true. That's true.
There would be basically no crime, right? We don't do that because that would be a massive overreaction. Similarly, we need.
But you're talking about pre-crime. These are people that are convicted for having committed a crime.
Of course, and they need to serve their sentences. Terrorism. They need to serve their sentences. But actually, what is the should we be treating people who stab people on the high street in the name of terrorism differently from people who just stab people because it's part of a robbery? I'm not sure we necessarily should. So I'm a little bit worried about this knee-jerk, lock him up, throw away the key approach. And actually, let's have a case-by-case basis. Let's the judges and the parole officers,
so softly. You can tell you're Let's get a liberal point of view. And Irina, don't feel like
we just had a liberal point of view.
Don't feel like you have to wait for us to stop. Please do jump in when you like. But what are your thoughts?
No, I'm listening to this with great interest, actually, and quite some amazement. So, first of all, I think we have to take a step back here because none of you has actually said what they mean by terrorism, which is quite important when you think about it. Hamish rightly said, do we treat different people differently if they killed somebody for whatever motivation? So terrorism, the definition of terrorism is really, really difficult. If you say it is violence committed in the name of some political conviction, for example, you would have to take a closer look at a lot of military engagement, and you'd have to take a very close look at the assassination of various foreign leaders or, people like Soleimani by the United States. So what is terrorism? That's the first thing. Why do we treat it differently? Why are we thinking that there are some category that you need to treat differently? Secondly, this has nothing to do with human rights whatsoever or the European Convention of Human Rights. Obviously, the only human right that here is at stake is the right of the victim to live. And that right is the same whether somebody, as Hamish said, stabs them or kills them with whatever means for whatever motivation. Clearly, that is something that we need to prevent. Now, we have the laws in place. We have all the criminal laws. They are actually flexible. You can lock people away for life if there is still a danger. What we don't have is proper implementation. We don't have the proper funding. We don't have the proper training for people who can assess somebody who's been in prison before they're being released. For example, whether they still are a danger. And that is not an easy assessment, right? You need a psychologist and you need people who really know what they're doing. You can't lock somebody up forever because, well, you never know. They may come out and commit another crime or they may not. You need to have a proper assessment of their danger. This has gone clearly wrong in this case. And it is clearly unacceptable that there wasn't a proper assessment. But you don't need a change in the laws. What you need is proper implementation of the laws that we already have. And you definitely need more funding for law enforcement and specifically for probation officers.
Well, I fully agree with more funding for law and order. So again, we're in agreement and probation officers. Yeah.
But Joel, I mean, this person was released early, but he was being tailed by undercover police, and he was stopped before he actually did fatally harm someone.
Well, he was, thank God. I mean, he still stabbed two people, could easily have killed them. But
I think this shows that the police did their job, actually. I actually looked at this kind of terrorist event, and I was like, wow, the police actually did tail this guy. They knew he was a danger. And exactly what Irina said, we have failed at a different part of our infrastructure.
Yeah, the criminal justice system failed, not the police. I think I'm with you on that.
I would feel a lot safer if the 200-odd characters who have been convicted of terrorist offences, who we know about, who are currently in our jails, were never released, frankly. And I know that the majority of the British voters, British public, feel that way.
Undoubtedly, that's true.
The terrorists get locked away. What about the murderers? What about the rapists? What about the other people who may come out and commit crimes? Should they just be treated differently from those people that you label terrorists? By the way, you still haven't explained who you think is a terrorist and who isn't.
No, I mean, I did. I think that there's a group of around, I don't know the exact number, but there's a group of around 200 individuals who have been convicted of specific terrorist offences in this country who are currently in prison. So I'm saying those people in particular, I personally, I know I speak for the majority of British population, would be more than happy if those people were never released from prison because they're a huge threat to this country.
No, but undoubtedly that is true, and I would feel a lot safer if we locked up huge swathes of people based on various prejudices that I may or may not have. But that's not how you run a liberal democratic society that's based on the rule of law. The other thing that we haven't mentioned, which I think is important, is of course that prison itself can be a breeding ground for radicalizing people further.
Exactly.
One of the issues I have with short prison sentences, people who don't pay their council tax or whatever, by way of example, is that it's hugely expensive and it doesn't really achieve anything. I don't really believe people should go to prison for certainly less than a month in terms of actual solid time served. But undoubtedly, prisons can be a place where people get radicalized or further radicalized. And the other aspect of this is, what are we doing in prison? Because, of course, detaining someone in prison is a punishment, and it should be a punishment, and that's a part of custodial sentencing, as is prevention, is safety of the public, keeping these people outside or inside and away from the public. But when you have people in prison, we can't just be lock them up, throw away the key for the course of their sentence. We need to be looking at how we can deal with them and not only prevent them getting more radicalized, but sort of unradicalize them. And that's education, skills, job opportunities, which is why I'm a big fan of people like Timpson's, and in Brixton Prison they have a restaurant where they train inmates with skills of in the service industries, because actually if you get released and you've got a bit of education, you've got some skills, you can get a job. That is how you prevent recidivism generally. But we don't seem to be doing
this liberal
that.
progressive attitude doesn't work. This is what we do. Don't forget the London attack recently was a guy going to a rehabilitation conference on talking about how this has helped his life.
Usman Khan.
Indeed.
I mean, I think if you
that doesn't mean that doesn't mean that
it means it doesn't work.
No, it doesn't. That is absolutely not what it means. It means that is an example of it not working.
Yeah.
Yes,
also, you can't just eradicate terrorism by throwing people in prison and locking the key away. Remember, there are loads and loads of attacks that were committed by people who had actually not been in prison, who had not been on the radar screen. People are radicalized in all kinds of places for all kinds of reasons. We need to deal with the reasons why they feel a need to be listening to, hatred or extremism in the first place. And I'm not just talking about the sort of Islamist jihadists. I'm talking about right-wing terrorists. I'm talking about white supremacists. All kinds of.
Would you treat these different types of terrorists differently? Would you say Islamic extremism is one type of terrorism? We have to treat it differently to maybe nationalism, Irish nationalism, maybe right-wing terrorism is different, or would you say they're all in the same kind of grouping?
Well, I grew up in Germany in the 80s, where we had the Red Brigades, and they were assassinating specific people rather than just random attacks, but they were like the first really hardcore terrorists. And that's why I said we need to think about how we define terrorism. So if terrorism is violence committed for an ideology, let's say that's broadly the definition of terrorism. And of course, that is any kind of ideology, right? Whether you are an Irish nationalist or a German communist or an American white supremacist or a jihadist who is radicalized by ISIS. The point is that these people are radicalized to such a degree that they feel they have no other way to express their opinion than by committing acts of violence, which are usually directed against innocent bystanders or those people they think are sort of representatives of society. So that radicalization, that happens because these people are alienated, if we don't deal with that, if we don't ask why they're alienated, then locking them up is going to maybe prevent a few of those repeat attacks, but it's never going to eradicate terrorism.
Well, I agree with that. And I'm slightly worried that my right-wing credentials are being somewhat tarnished here at the moment. So I will let me burnish them with this. I would be very muscular about dealing with the causes of radicalization in the community. I think we give far too much leeway to rather unpleasant imams, particularly schools that are teaching slightly very odd off curriculum attitudes and things, and promoting and not challenging people who seek to speak in the name of communities such as the Islamic and Muslim community. We need to be much firmer on that. We need to promote a liberal sort of strand of Islam, in particular in Britain. And part of that is actually a wider issue to do with assimilation, and that's why I believe that people should learn to speak English, and I have concerns about the way that the women in some Muslim communities are treated and segregated, because actually, unless a community is brought into wider society, like, for example, the Jewish community has done so successfully over the years, like the Sikh community and the Hindu community has done so successfully in this country. There are elements of the Muslim community in this country that haven't done that, and I think that's where there's a real battle to fight that can actually prevent all of this. And I would be a lot tougher. For example, Abu Qatada and Abu Hamza, absolutely get rid of them and deport them to Jordan. I mean, no question in my mind that should be the case. And as for burning books and burning the satanic verses, which I have my very own proud copy of right here, I'm sorry, but we have to be much more muscular in our liberalism and say, in this country, that's not what we do. We don't, don't do that.
I actually agree with most of that. I'm happy to say, Hamish, and particularly happy that you mentioned the word liberal about 5 times.
Absolutely, because I am a liberal.
Just one thing that I disagree with, and that is the focus on Islamist terrorism. The truth is that, according to the Home Office, the greatest threat in future rise of terrorism is now actually right-wing terrorism.
What is right-wing terrorism, though?
So the attacks that we've seen on Joe Cox and other racist, xenophobic, white supremacist attacks that come from...
Are you actually saying that white supremacy is more of an issue than extremist Islamism in this country?
So according to Home Office assessment, in terms of future threats, they think that this is the fastest growing trend in terrorism. I know we have seen a string of deadly and horrific attacks, mostly committed by Islamic terrorists, but we mustn't forget that we've also had attacks around the world from right-wing terrorists. So I think single out only Muslim or extreme Islamist terrorism is also wrong. We have to look at just the degree of intolerance in any type of community, whether that be a religious community or, any other community. Any type of intolerance, any type of exclusion can lead to that kind of radicalization. It's almost like it doesn't really matter what the content is of that religion or of that belief.
But it's not always down to isolation, and it's not always just that terrorism is the only way people think they can express their views. It is often down to people indoctrinating the vulnerable. And Her Majesty's Chief Inspector of Ofsted came out this week to say, look, it's happening in a lot of these Islamist schools, and that they're practicing and preaching extreme views, and no one's challenging it because they're all afraid of looking racist or Islamophobic.
I agree. I just can't accept that in reality that the Home Office is correct on that one. I just think there is, frankly, a hierarchy of concerns that people would have. As a councillor, for instance, I was amazed in Brent that there was pushback at local level against Prevent and what it was trying to achieve. Incredible that the Labour-controlled council were essentially slating Prevent. I know that happened in Labour councils across London and other areas. So there's not engaging with a programme that is meant to stop radicalisation in children from a young age. So, as Hamish was saying, failure to engage with those programmes is very disappointing. But I'm afraid I am Jewish, so of course white supremacism is a big concern for me. But I'm afraid that Islamic terrorism, which we've seen, of the kind that we've seen for the last 20 years, or since 9/11, is absolutely terrifying to Western values and people who live in Western countries. There is a hierarchy. There's something that is fundamentally existential about the threat that it poses and the barbarism of it and the terror that it imbues in populations. And that is why I think it needs to be treated in a specific way. And
but Joel, okay, sorry. We, like you said, since 9/11, I mean, what we're seeing now is a reaction to Western foreign policy.
Oh, come on!
It's the truth. This is what we're seeing right now. We have been intervening in the Middle East since forever, and we're shocked. We're suddenly shocked that these people want a little bit of revenge. Want a little bit of payback.
You sound like
you're going to blame 9/11 on Iraq.
I'm not apologetic. I'm just saying it's a fact. We just continuously pursue our adventurism in the Middle East and other countries around the world, and we don't expect this to come back and hit us where it hurts.
Well, that may be, but I'm telling you in terms of
the solution is different to what you're suggesting. You're saying that this is what we have to do. We have to lock these people up, never let them out, and this is going to solve the problem. But actually, we have to go back one step, two steps, three steps back, and try and figure out why these people are angry towards us. And it isn't just
we know why
it isn't
angry,
just
because they don't.
It isn't just about that. It isn't just about the anger. You mix the anger with their religious fervor, with their indoctrination, with the radicalization, and then you have a recipe of disaster, which actually we have to bear and we have to suffer. We have to go 3 steps back and change our foreign policy, and then maybe in the future we can undo what is continuously mounting up like a little bit of an avalanche.
Okay,
I think you're spot on, Amir. Absolutely, and it's not an excuse. That's really important to say. It is not an excuse of those attacks. Obviously, there was never an excuse for murdering somebody. Okay, but we do have to look at the reasons, and it's spot on. I think the images that came out of the prisons in Iraq, where the Americans were torturing people, etc., etc. You can't just say that didn't happen, and of course that has caused deep-seated anger. And we have to somehow also look at what went wrong with our policy, what went wrong with our engagement with those people, and what went wrong with entire parts of our communities in cities throughout Europe. This is not just a UK problem. This is everywhere. It's in France, everywhere else, where whole communities feel completely disenfranchised, feel like they have nothing in common with the majority in their country, that don't feel like they are even part of that community. And clearly that goes 2 ways. It takes 2 to tango, and clearly none of the 2 sides here wanted to tango. So we also have to do something about our own side of that division.
I found both the recent contributions disturbing, because I do think it is, if not an apology or seeking to sort of make excuses, it is seeking to, I think, distort the reality of the situation, because it is not simply about Western foreign policy, which is an easy target, and of course it has never been completely perfect. But I'll give 2 examples which show the fallacy of that argument. The first of all is, you look at ISIS, right? I cannot believe the proposition that if the West, America, NATO withdrew from the Middle East, withdrew the troops, that ISIS would say, fine, right? We've got our caliphate in Iraq and Syria.
That's why I said 3 steps back, 1 step back.
Well,
we created ISIS by invading Iraq.
What they want to do, they're not just get out of IO. They want to drive Israel into the sea, and then they want to come to Europe, and they want to stop us. This is why the homegrown terrorists, if it was just about actually we just want to live our way in our countries, why would they be here? It's because it's not about just just leave them there and they can do their own thing, because actually they object to me living here in my way,
right?
And they want to stop that.
Absolutely.
There's a basic.
Sorry, just let me finish this one point. And for as long as they want to do that, I've got a problem with it. And yeah, I'm going to support dealing with that because the world is globalized. Yeah, but it's not just about. It's very easy to base. You say that it's Western foreign policy, the Iraq War, and the involvement of the United States in the Soviet Afghanistan war, and those pesky Jews in Israel. Why are they there? If only they could just sort of move off.
Yeah, well, what is Finland's foreign policy? They've had terrorist attacks. What is Germany have had them? I mean, countries that have had no involvement at all in the Middle East have had terrorist attacks just because they're Western countries.
Look, I'm going to say what everyone's thinking here. It's not about foreign policy. It's about an incompatibility in views and values. We let our gay people get married. We let our women drive and wear whatever they want. We can eat and go wherever we want to. We have civil liberties here, and that offends certain people. It offends everything they stand for, and they don't want it. They don't want us to have it. That is what it comes down to. Civil liberties and Sharia law are incompatible.
Look.
Well, no, I mean, that is part of it, but that doesn't explain, for example, right-wing terrorism, right? That doesn't explain,
Which is not a major issue in comparison to extremist Islamists.
Or tell that to the people in Christchurch, or tell that to the people in Norway. Of course, it's an issue. You can't say it's not.
We're talking about UK terrorism here. Well, it's okay to say that the Home Office thinks at some point in the future that this might be a bigger issue, but they're not prophets in the Home Office.
I think you're forgetting about the IRA, for example, which
is the IRA still a major issue?
So, well, luckily not. But you wouldn't. You can't just say, this is terrorism, but this isn't. But I agree. Yes, of course, there are some people who object to these values, and that is one part of it. But that is not the sort of fundamental issue here. I think the fundamental issue is that people are angry, they're disenfranchised, and we have created a culture where there was no attempt to engage with them, and that's where they're vulnerable, and that's why some people obviously abuse that situation to radicalize them. And yes, I think schools should not take part in this, and where we do see radicalization in schools, that needs to stop clearly, because it starts with education. It starts with children when they're small, and it is then that you have the best chance to integrate people, and that clearly hasn't happened. And I think that is a really, a situation we need to change. But as I said, it takes both sides to change it.
I look forward to the Lib Dems campaigning for us during the mayoral campaigns for a strong collaboration with the Prevent program then in schools, and for a beefed up approach towards prevent and de-radicalization in schools. That'd be good to see.
We are campaigning for any type of investment in education, particularly in youth programs, for after-school programs, for people to have a place to go where they actually find, somebody to engage them rather than hanging out in the streets. So any type of engagement of young people, any type of investment in education is an investment in prevention and de-radicalization.
Look, fundamentally, my problem is with the left, with the Lib Dems, with Labour, people on the left generally. I was complimented by Irina for using the word liberal, and I am a liberal, but I'm a muscular liberal. I don't understand the people on the left. I don't understand. I'm not a flabby liberal. I may be flabby. No, my liberalism I'm very muscular about.
Moobs.
I don't understand the Queers for Palestine thing that you see at Gay Pride, right? Israel. Do you know what the criminal punishment for being homosexual in Israel is? Nothing. Do you know what it is in Palestine? There is one, right? End of story. The people on the left trumpet identity politics. They trumpet LGBTQ plus AA, Cyrillic alphabetic spaghetti, all of this stuff, right? We love it. We love diversity, whatever. But then we are so weak. Yeah. We are so weak when we're faced with ideologies like Islamism that obviously hate gays, obviously hate Jews, oppress and suppress women. I mean, we need to be very clear that in this country, you can be British and you can be Christian, you can be Jewish, you can be Muslim, you can be Hindu, you can be Sikh, you can be Buddhist, you can be any sort of color from any part of the globe, and you can be British. But
Totally.
you need to understand that means a certain permissive, tolerant, liberal attitude. And for some reason, the left has a blind spot when it comes to hard Islamism.
Any ism. Sorry, I as a liberal Democrat and a totally devoted social liberal, any isms to me are not, not what I want this society to adhere to. I don't care what isms they are, and you're right, we should not discriminate between them. None of them is bringing any good to us.
Well, I think in terms of education, it's very interesting the way that the protests about the promotion of homosexual relationships in primary schools in Birmingham was dealt with. I felt that was very weak in the way that those parents were allowed to essentially shut the school down, and that protest spread to many schools. So I think that attitude towards a muscular, if you like, interpretation of British values should absolutely be adhered to in schools, and that would, I think, find some common ground here in terms of tackling the problem at grassroots level.
I think you're
right.
I would agree with the Islamists
amazingly actually agree with that. I wouldn't have thought so, but I actually do agree with that.
Everyone to agree.
You know what? Homophobia does not only exist in Islam. In some radical parts of Islam, it has existed always in Christianity, in Judaism, and other religions.
That's true.
And in no religions law for. So I don't think again that you can single out Islam in this respect.
No, definitely not. But homophobia should not be allowed in any way in schools. Homosexuality should be taught to children as a completely accepable relationship choice.
Not a choice.
Well, you'll have to educate me further, Hamish, but I'm trying to be nice.
Do you choose to be straight?
He chooses to have straight relationships, though.
We're talking about relationships.
Could you choose to?
Hamish, I was talking about choices because we were talking. It's actually.
But at the same time, the parents also have a choice.
Parents and having gay parents and things like that. So actually, it is about relationships.
But the parents have a choice to let their children be taught in the faith that they've brought them up in as well. That is also a choice that we should stand by. We should stand by religious freedums.
Okay.
No.
I'm not saying teach homophobia. I'm saying that
we're getting way beyond the remit of this conversation, which was terrorism.
Yes,
and I think we had a very brief moment of consensus.
No, I didn't agree with you guys.
We had a brief moment of consensus where everyone agreed that I was right. No. And I think we should probably draw the discussion on that discussion. I think the record shows that. Yeah, I think we should probably just draw the discussion on that aspect to a close.
We definitely have to have another podcast on the question of liberalism, religion, and LGBT plus rights, because I have actually written and spoken about this extensively, and it's definitely a whole podcast worth, but maybe not what we're going to discuss tonight. But it does go to the heart of what we say about, how we treat people who feel that they are disenfranchised and they don't integrate, and how that results in a violent reaction which can become terrorism. And I think it is a slippery slope. I think illiberalism and intolerance can somehow result in violent extremism and in terrorism. And if we don't look at the origins, and if we don't try to nip them in the bud, then yes, we will never be able to defeat terrorism, even if we lock keys away.
I think that's a very good note to end on, so thank you for that. Let's move on to
Let's
Brexit.
just do 20 minutes on Brexit or something, because my card is coming shortly. So.
Oh, God, so hamstered. So that about wraps it up for this week. Thank you very much for watching. Please like, subscribe, and comment, and we will see you on the next one. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Very good. Well, I'm still on the list for London, theoretically. I'm number 6, so it's not that likely I'll get elected. But hey,
It's better than Joel.
Ouch.
Joel would kill people to be in your position.
Would he?
Literally.
No.
I'm not sure you really would, but hey.
I don't know who I'm voting for on the list. So I don't know who I'm voting for Mayor. I think I'll vote for Roberto, the Tory candidate in Barnet Camden, but I don't know who I'm going to vote for on the list.
You're going to vote for Roberto?
Yeah, why not? He's cute.
Okay.
Right.
I'm as you say, I've got lots of principles.
And of course, I'm here because I love Amir to bits, and particularly since he had his change of heart, and he's been like the most amazing activist in our party. So any success that we'll have in London 2020, it'll be entirely due to Amir single-handedly.
Oh shit!
We'd love to hear it.